Hey guys, this is Adam. Today I want to talk about Azure Active Directory because it doesn't matter what kind of role you are playing in your organization, you should at least cover the basics and understand the basic of Azure Active Directory. Today, an introduction into this great service. Stay tuned. Azure Active Directory is your cloud-based identity provider but also access management service. And if you use any of the services like Skype, OneDrive, or Outlook, you already are a customer and the user of Azure Active Directory because it is a centralized service for all of those services. So when you log into your Live ID, you are in fact logging to Azure AD to access any of those services. If you work in an organization and that organization has Office 365 and Microsoft 365 services like Teams, Power BI, SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, or any other service from that package, you again use Azure Active Directory to log in to any of those services. And if you use Azure, well, the same applies. You use Azure Active Directory to connect to Azure to access your subscriptions, resource groups, and your services that you purchased. It is again a centralized service for your identity and access management. And if you are a web developer, you can use Azure Active Directory to secure the access to your custom web services and applications so that you have unified experience and single sign-on for all your users and your organization. Before we move to what is identity provider, let's talk about what is identity itself. An identity is a thing that gets authenticated. And authentication is simply said a process of verification of the identity in the request. So if you are sending a request as Adam, a service needs to verify whenever this is a proper request actually sent by Adam. And the identity itself can be a user with username and password, but it also can be an application or a service which will authenticate using secret keys and certificates. Now that we know what identity is, let's talk about the classic approach of building applications without the use of identity provider. First of all, you usually have a client, and that client will connect to the server. In order to authenticate to that server, a set of credentials needs to be sent. If that's a user, this might be a username and a password. Server at that point needs to verify whenever that user and the credentials provided are correct. This, in a classic approach, usually was done through some sort of user database, where application was storing all the users and all the credentials within its own database. Once the verification was done, server was returning the result back to the client. This approach was very commonly used about 10 years ago, when the desktop and web applications were almost always containing its own user databases, because identity providers didn't exist at that time. So what kind of challenges this architecture poses? First of all, if you need to implement any additional security features, it takes a lot of time and a lot of money to do that. Even implementing the simple user database and containing user credentials there is a very time-consuming task. Second of all, you introduce a new security risk for your application because of that user database. You need to maintain user information there, usually some personal data, and their credentials. I think most of us heard at least once in our lifetime that some application lost its users and their credentials due to security leak or hacking. This is because they were maintaining their own user databases and they did not secure it properly. So if you can avoid this, well, why not? One additional challenge that you have by using this classic approach is having a client connect to multiple services, because that client will need to remember multiple username and multiple passwords. If it's a client application, you will need to store and maintain all of those. Again, if your team is managing those virtual machines, SQL databases, they will also need to provision multiple users and maintain all of them. And of course, this ends up being more work for your clients, but also your operation teams. Now that we have covered classic approach and the challenges, let's talk about identity provider and the benefits. In the same scenario of the client connecting to the server, we introduce Azure AD as the identity provider for the client and for the server. In which case, client, instead of sending its credentials to the server, it sends them to Azure AD. In exchange, from Azure AD, it retrieves a token. A token is a small encoded information about the client and its identity. This token is then exchanged with the server in order to perform the request. So instead of credentials, you send a token. And the server, based on a trust relationship with Azure AD, connects to it, retrieves some basic information, and performs token verification. Once the token is verified that the client is the one who it claims to be, a result is returned back to the client. In most cases, this is done automatically through SDKs. So if you're building web applications or using out-of-the-box features in Azure, this is super easy to set up. While this looks a bit more complicated on the diagram, it is so much easier to set this up versus building your own identity solution for your application. And one additional benefit is that that user database is no longer here, because all the identities, all the users are stored within Azure AD. So the benefits that you get here are, first of all, let's go back to our scenario. If you have client connecting to multiple services, it connects to Azure AD instead and retrieves a token. And then a token is exchanged with all of those services, so that those services just need to configure the trust relationship between their services and Azure AD, and then they don't really have to maintain the users at all. They will only need to maintain the authorization part whenever a user is allowed to use those services. But the account itself, this is outsourced to Azure AD. And the same goes for client. They will only need to remember a single set of credentials and use them with Azure AD. Besides this, the obvious benefits here is centralized user management. So for your IT teams, they just go to Azure AD and manage all their clients, their applications there. Second of all, you have top-notch security, because Microsoft was perfecting Azure AD for many years now. It is state-of-the-art security that you just get to use for pretty much free. Lastly, Azure AD has a lot of additional security features that you get to use just by using Azure AD, like MFA, very oftenly used these days. MFA is a process where besides sending credentials like username and password, you also need to send additional information like a text message from your mobile phone or click on the notification on the mobile application. So to summarize, Identity Provider is a centralized service that allows you to implement identity management for your applications in a single place and reuse them across more applications and services. Now that we know what it is, let's talk about who should learn about Azure AD. First of all, IT administrators, because they are the one who will be configuring the multi-factor authentication, synchronizing your users with your on-premises, because they are the ones who will need to protect your users and your organizational assets, and Azure AD has a lot of features to help with that. Second of all, application developers should learn about Azure AD because it allows you to provide that identity management service for your web application and services that you create. If users already signed into Azure AD, you can take advantage of single sign-on, so they will not have to retype their credentials whenever using your application, which is super nice when it comes to user experience in your applications. Additionally, Azure AD allows you to create personalized experience with all the additional services like Microsoft Graph that it provides. And if you're integrating with other services by either exposing your API to those services or connecting to other services, you can use Azure AD as your identity and access management service for those, which is again a very nice benefit. And lastly, if you are a subscriber of Microsoft 365, Office 365, or just Dynamics CRM, you can already take advantage of Azure AD because automatically whenever you create that subscription, an Azure AD is created behind the scenes for you, so you can manage all your integrated apps in Azure AD. Let me now switch to Azure Portal to quickly show you how to find information about Azure AD. Notice that in Azure Portal, you don't really have to have any Azure license in order to take advantage and configure Azure AD. To find Azure AD, you can do one of multiple things. First of all, you can use search on the top by typing Azure Active, and Azure Active Directory will come up on the list of the services. Just press it, and you're ready to use Azure Active Directory. This is probably the fastest way to access Azure AD. On the left-hand side, you will see a lot of blades for configuration and management of your identities. For instance, the most common ones are users, where you can manage and create users for your organization. As you see, you have two options here. You can either create new user or add a guest user. A guest user can be either a standalone account outside of your organization, or it can be external Active Directory account from other organization. You can also create new user by clicking on the new user button and providing, first of all, a username. I'm gonna call it Tom Doe. Give him a name, Tom Doe. This is the display name that will be seen in Azure portal. Give it a first name and last name. You can use auto-generate password or specify your own password. I tend to choose the second option so I can generate the strong password even for the first login for my users for better security. And then you can already assign it during the creation to some sort of groups and roles. But for now, let's just create an empty user. So let's hit create. And that's pretty much it. Now you can use that user to sign in. The best way to do it is click on Tom Doe to grab the full username that you will need to use during the sign-in process. Right-click on the right-hand side or open new incognito window and select sign in with different account. In here, choose another account if you already have running session and paste in the new user account. This is the full username that you specified, but additionally the domain name of your Azure AD tenant. Select next and now provide the password. The password in this case is very strong password that I chose. And notice that during the first login, you need to change that password. So even though I provided the password, I'm still requiring my users to provide new, strong password. Select sign in, and that's pretty much it. You might have this pop-up on the first sign in to configure multi-factor authentication if your organization is requiring it. For the demo purposes, you can skip for now, although you will be only able to skip this for 14 days since the first login. Let's hit skip for now and open Azure portal. This is a completely different session. This is the session of Tom, and as you see, Tom in Azure portal still sees Azure AD. But if he goes to resource groups, for instance, he sees nothing because currently he is part of my Azure AD, but he has no resource groups, no privileges assigned in Azure. He can still use Azure portal and still manage Active Directory if he has proper roles, but he doesn't have to have any Azure subscriptions. So if Tom wants to learn a little bit more about Azure AD, at this moment he can't because he is not a global admin here. And I, as an administrator, might not be able to grant him proper privileges to perform his tests. So what Tom can do is, if you go on the left-hand side, and here's another option of accessing Azure AD through this left-hand side blade called Azure Active Directory. Simply click on it to access Azure AD. Once you're in there, you will quickly notice that your role specifies that Tom is currently just a user within this Active Directory. So he cannot perform all the actions if he wants to learn. In some organization, this is very restrictive, so you might not even be able to review the Azure AD blade. So if Tom wants to learn, what he can do right now is create his own free Azure Active Directory. Even though he's part of my tenant, he can create his own tenant and his own organization to play around with it. To do that, go on the left-hand side on the top blade, select Create a Resource, and type Azure Active Directory and select it. Notice that there's a standardized template for creating new Azure Active Directory, and it doesn't cost anything, so you can freely create it. Select Create and give an organization name. In this case, it will be tom.org, and I will choose the same domain name. This will create tom.org on Microsoft.com. It's free, so I'm ready to set it up. And lastly, you need to select a region and country. Notice that in this case, it's not an Azure region, it's not a data center region. It's a region where your tenant will be residing. Usually depends on the country where your organization is. In my case, this will be Poland, and hit Create. In about 2 minutes time, the organization is now created. The easiest way to pick it up that it's created is to relog using Tom's account. To do that, select Tom's on the top right corner, and if you click Switch Directory, you might not yet see your Azure Active Directory on the list. So you need to re-sign in. To do it, click Sign in with different account, and simply select already existing Tom Doe's session. When you do it, you will log in back to Azure portal, and your directory should be now visible. Once I log into this directory, I will still get the pop-up that I don't have any subscriptions, but I don't need to have any. So I need to simply click on my username, select Switch Directory, and now Tom organization is visible. When I click on it, I now have my own Azure AD. It directly went through to User's Blade because this is the blade that I currently had open. But if you select Azure AD, Azure Active Directory from the services list, now you are a global administrator of your own Azure AD tenant. So you can play around and do pretty much everything that you want and test everything that you want. You might even want to move your subscriptions, your private subscriptions, to your own tenant, so you can test pretty much everything that you would need to. This is ideal for testing of anything that requires higher privileges of Azure AD. Once you're done with the tenant, simply select Delete Tenant and review everything before deletion. Notice that you might get this pop-up that you cannot delete Azure subscriptions, and this is not because you don't have privileges to do so, it's because as a global admin, there might be some subscriptions underneath. To resolve this, select Get Permission to Delete Azure Resources, scroll down and select Access Management for Azure Resources, hit Save. That means if there would be any subscriptions under this tenant, Tom would be able to see it. Now when he clicks on Delete the directory, hits Refresh, now sees that there are no subscriptions, therefore deletion is okay, and he can click Delete. This might take a moment for deletion to be done, but that's pretty much it. This is how easily you can create new tenants and test some stuff. This is pretty great if you want to test some premium licensing, but now that we're done with it, we can switch back to the directory of my organization. Simply click on my icon, go switch to directory, and select your own directory from the list. We're back to the Users Management Blade, and that's pretty much it for this demo. I will now switch to my personal account to show you other options that you have within Azure AD. As I said, the quickest way to access this is through Recent Resources, which is another option of accessing Azure Active Directory. Select it, and here, besides user management, you also have group management. So you can create user groups within your directory, and it's as simple as pressing New Group, providing a name, selecting whenever this is a type of security group or it's an Office 365 group, giving it a name, it will be Demo Group. You can provide a group description if you want, select the owners and also the members. You can do it at this time or just click Create, and once the group is created, you can then select that group and manage the members of that group by selecting Add Members. You can then add maybe an Amy user, and if you want, you can add more users, like Tom. And that's pretty much it. When it comes to directory, you have a lot of additional panels, like managing technical accounts with enterprise applications and application registrations. You have Azure AD Connect if you want to synchronize to your on-premises. You have password reset features, security features, user settings, the default settings for all the users within your organization. You have some monitoring capabilities and more options. Besides what you see in this panel, Azure AD has a lot of additional complementary services and panels to configure it. And you will find all of them by typing Azure AD in the panel and notice how many additional options there are, like Connect Health, B2C, authentication methods, conditional access, etc. There's plenty of options around Azure AD. It's so big that you could pretty much become an expert on Azure AD alone. If you're working with governance teams, it's definitely a right path to choose, and learn about all of those options separately. Going back to our presentation. So all of those features that we're talking about is around identity management of Azure AD. There are of course a lot of additional features about identity management of Azure AD, but let's focus now on the access management part of Azure AD. Access management, simply said, is a process of controlling, verification, tracking, and managing access to authorized users or end applications. And to explain this process, I will use Azure as an example. Let's take a user. Let's call her Amy. Amy wants to perform an update on a virtual machine within Azure, and this update needs a permission called write. To perform this action, Amy has to have proper privileges on that virtual machine. And to do that, a current owner, let's call him Adam, needs to go to that SQL Gateway virtual machine in Azure portal, select Access and Control Blade, add a new role assignment. Inside of that role assignment, he needs to select two things. First, a role. A role is then found in Azure AD. In this case, it's an owner role definition. This owner role definition has a set of privileges attached to it. But also, in order to create role assignment, Adam needs to select a user that this role will be assigned to. In this case, this will be Amy, which again will be found in Azure AD as an user object. Once those tools are found and the button Save is clicked, a new role assignment object will be created in Azure AD, which will combine the owner with the user object of Amy. Once this is done, it will also be assigned to the scope. In this case, the scope will be virtual machine. Once this is done, Azure will automatically verify whenever that role assignment exists, and whenever that role assignment exists in a context of this virtual machine scope or its parent scope like resource group or subscription. If it does, then Amy will be allowed to update virtual machine. This process very nicely explains how the roles are organized within Azure, and this is pretty much called role-based access control. If you want, you can create your own roles, so Azure AD is very extensible here. You have a lot of additional options. There are many more scenarios using Azure AD for access management, for instance when developing web applications, but we will cover this in a separate video when talking about cross-service authentication using Azure AD. For now, this is all we need to know. When it comes to Azure management, we can switch to Azure portal. In here, I can go to my resource groups. And currently I have some resource groups already created. For this demo, I will use Logic Apps end-to-end SQL Firewall Demo resource group, where I will go to Access Management and add a new role assignment. In here, again, I need to select a role. For instance, I want a reader role granted to Amy or Tom. In this case, maybe I will use Tom since I just created this. I selected Tom, hit save. Once Tom is added, I can review his assignment in Role Assignments Blade, and Tom is now on the list with a reader role. I will now switch to Tom's session by clicking on my profile, selecting already existing session for Tom, and I will navigate back to Azure portal. In here, I can now select Azure resource groups. Tom is now able to see his resource group because he was assigned a reader role on a scope of this resource group. Therefore, all the services within these resource groups also inherited reader role for Tom. And if Tom would want to update some service, for instance, if he would go to virtual machine and try to restart this, he would get an error because he has only reader role, which doesn't give him privileges to restart virtual machines. Access management in Azure is governed entirely by Azure Active Directory, and it's very secure, and you're using the same account that you'd use for normal application. Instead, you use them in Azure portal for your Azure resources. Let's go back to presentation because there's one more very crucial topic that I want to talk about. And that is a very brief description. What are the differences between Azure Active Directory Domain Services, and Azure Active Directory Domain Services? There will be a video separately talking about each one of them and how they compare to each other, but I want to be sure that you will leave this session with at least knowing the basic difference, and they are not the same. So first of all, you have Active Directory Domain Services, which is your on-premise directory services that you use if you already are on the market with your company for some time. So this is the place where you manage all your users internally in on-premise environment. You also have Azure Active Directory, which is the cloud service allowing you to give identity and access management capabilities for your users, organization, and applications. And lastly, there's Azure Active Directory Domain Services, a cloud version of the domain services from on-premises, although it doesn't have all the features. So what are the key differences here? First of all, there are some that should be noted. And the answer is probably a bit more difficult that I could explain within just a couple of minutes. But if you are a company that is on the market for quite some time, then you probably already have Active Directory Domain Services, the on-premises version. And it doesn't have all the features of Azure Active Directory, but it has all the required to run the organization. If you will be moving to the cloud, most likely what you will end up doing is synchronizing your on-premises version to Azure Active Directory through a service called Azure AD Connect. This way you have Azure AD using the same identities that you already have in your on-premise environment. This way your users will be able to use the same credentials and same identity for internal, but also cloud applications. And also, if you are moving to the cloud and you will need some of the features of the domain services from on-premises in the cloud, then you might want to leverage a synchronization between Azure AD with Azure AD domain services, allowing you to take advantage of some older protocols like LDAP, Kerberos, or maybe using group policies with the cloud solutions or the solutions that do not support the newest features. So if you have some legacy applications, Azure Active Directory Domain Services allow you to take advantage of some of the features from the classic on-premise directory services. While the topic is much broader here, I just wanted to be sure that when you leave this session, you understand that Azure Active Directory is not a replacement of on-premises domain services. If you're already existing organization, you will most likely end up using Azure AD Connect to synchronize. If you're just starting your organization and you want to be cloud native, maybe Azure AD with Azure AD Domain Services will be enough to cover all of your needs. But it is for you to decide, and you should definitely explore this topic further. So let's leave this session with talking about what are the key additional features that you also get by using Azure AD. First of all, Azure AD is free up to 500,000 objects. Pretty much anything that we do in Azure is an object. A user is an object, a role is an object, a role assignment is an object. Pretty much anything. You can also manage Azure Active Directory with PowerShell and CLI. Just type few commands and everything that you did in Azure Portal can be done automatically through scripting. Additionally, you have conditional access, which is amazing security feature that allows you to take security and control of the access for your users and your organization to the next level. For this, you would need a Premium 1 license at least. And if the security of your organization is of the highest priority for you, then you also have privileged identity management with Premium P2 license. All the scenarios that we are talking about today are business-to-business scenarios, but you also have B2C, which is business-to-customer scenarios. So if you want to create user customer-facing applications and allow them to sign in and create accounts, then you have a version of Azure AD called Azure AD B2C for that. And with device management, you can very easily protect assets of your organization. You also have Manage Identities, which is pretty neat feature of being able to assign an identity and lifecycle of that identity to Azure resource and securely authenticate without using any passwords. Additionally, you have a lot of reports and monitoring available within Azure AD for free, and some advanced reports if you purchase at least Premium 1 license. Azure AD also allows you to assign a custom domain names. So if your organization has a domain name already purchased, you can assign it to Azure AD so that users will log in using their familiar logins. And lastly, Azure AD allows for integration with external identity providers like Facebook, Google, or maybe some direct federation. which allows you to take advantage of external identity providers. So if your users have their own private accounts, they can use it to log into Azure AD and access Azure resources or Office 365 resources this way. It's pretty much depending on the needs of your applications and your organization, but there is support to do that. But remember to leave this session remembering two things about Azure AD. This is the identity provider and access management service in Azure. After all of that, you should at least understand that regardless of your role, you should know and you should understand the basics of Azure Active Directory. Definitely deep dive into the topics that might interest you for your purpose and your role in your organization. For today, that's it. If you like the video, hit thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and subscribe if you want to see more, and definitely see you next time.